The Caribbean Sea stretched endlessly, dark and calm under the late afternoon sun, its waves rolling with deceptive serenity. But far beyond the normal shipping lanes, where few commercial vessels dared to go, something massive drifted on the horizon. At first glance, it could have been mistaken for an oil tanker, rusted and forgotten by time, just another relic from a shipping company that had long since gone bankrupt. But anyone who came closer quickly realized it was no derelict. The ship had been transformed, remade into something far more sinister. It was a fortress. Once a supertanker built in the 1970s, the vessel had been gutted down to its frame and rebuilt by the engineers and mercenaries hired by the cartel. Its decks were layered with crude steel plating, thick enough to resist heavy gunfire. The cartel had welded makeshift watchtowers to its sides, converting cranes into weapons platforms. The original bridge was now hidden beneath reinforced armor, while above it rose new structures, radar domes, signal jammers, and mounted artillery cannons scavenged from military-grade suppliers in Eastern Europe. Aerial photos showed that the fortress bristled with firepower like a floating city of steel teeth. On the main deck, long cargo containers sat stacked in neat rows. But instead of goods, they carried hidden missile systems disguised beneath tarps, their launchers programmed to rise at a moment's notice. Heavy machine guns were stationed at intervals, their barrels pointing toward the ocean. Snipers patrolled the elevated catwalks, their silhouettes sharp against the crimson glow of the setting sun. The entire ship had been converted into a mobile stronghold, a place where the cartel could rule with impunity. Beneath the deck, the modifications were even more elaborate. Where crude oil had once been stored in massive compartments, the cartel had installed laboratories and refineries. Chemists in protective suits worked around the clock, processing cocaine paste flown in from jungle airstrips into a white powder ready for international distribution. Other compartments were filled with meth labs, their acrid fumes vented through disguised exhaust pipes. Hidden chambers stored tons of narcotics, stacked in neat bricks, all wrapped in plastic and marked with the cartel's insignia. In the heart of the ship, behind sealed bulkheads guarded by armed enforcers, there were cells. Prisoners were kept there, not for ransom, but as examples. Defectors, traitors, and rival lieutenants who had crossed the wrong people were locked in cages below the waterline. The air was stale, filled with the sound of dripping pipes, and the screams of men who were slowly forgotten. The cartel didn't waste bullets on betrayal, they preferred silence and darkness to do the work. The mastermind behind the fortress was a man few had ever seen in person, known only as El Almirante. A former naval officer who had defected decades ago, he brought with him a tactical mind and an obsession with maritime dominance. Under his direction, the cartel poured millions of dollars into transforming the supertanker. For him, the sea was the last frontier, a place where laws meant nothing, where governments struggled to project power. The fortress was his crown jewel, a symbol of invulnerability. Satellite reconnaissance had tracked the vessel for weeks. From above, its movements seemed erratic, never staying long in one location, drifting between international waters and remote Caribbean inlets. Fishing villages whispered about it, though few dared to speak openly. Fishermen claimed they'd seen boats full of men with rifles patrolling around the giant ship, warning any intruder to steer clear. Rumors spread that the fortress carried not just drugs, but surface-to-air missiles and naval mines. Some even whispered of a nuclear deal in the making, that the cartel was offering the fortress as a bargaining chip to rogue states in exchange for materials too dangerous to ignore. Inside U.S. intelligence offices, the photographs caused an immediate stir. Grainy images showed the outlines of artillery barrels sticking from the decks, shadows of fortified walls that weren't supposed to exist on a civilian tanker. Military analysts studied every pixel, noting the thickness of the steel plating, the suspected locations of command centers, the heat signatures of engines running day and night. It wasn't just a drug operation anymore. It was a military installation. The fortress wasn't designed merely for defense. Reports suggested that the cartel had ambitions beyond smuggling. With the firepower mounted on the ship, they could enforce their will across entire shipping lanes. Commercial vessels could be extorted for protection. Rival traffickers could be annihilated with a single barrage. And if the rumors of weapons deals were true, then the fortress represented a new kind of threat, a cartel with the ability to project military force far beyond its traditional borders. What made the fortress even more dangerous was its mobility. Unlike a land base, it could not be easily targeted or destroyed. It moved with the currents, slipping from one country's jurisdiction to another, always in the gray zone of international waters. Naval patrols had spotted it, but by the time ships drew close, the fortress was gone, hidden by storms or vanished into the vast blue emptiness of the sea. The cartel knew how to exploit the ocean's size and silence. The men stationed aboard the fortress were no ordinary smugglers. They were soldiers, mercenaries, and deserters from foreign armies who had sold their loyalty for money. They trained daily on the decks, running drills with assault rifles and practicing close-quarter combat in the narrow passageways below. Their morale was fueled by cocaine and alcohol, their wages paid in stacks of US dollars. Loyalty was enforced with cruelty. Anyone who faltered was dragged below deck and never seen again. At night, the fortress glowed faintly against the horizon, its lights muted to avoid detection, but its presence undeniable. From the distance, it looked like a city floating in the darkness, a place both alive and haunted. The thrum of generators echoed through the steel walls, powering floodlights and communication systems. Antennas reached skyward, sending encrypted messages across the hemisphere. Inside, cartel lieutenants gathered around long tables, maps and laptops spread before them, plotting new routes, deals, and betrayals. The ocean itself seemed to recognize the danger. Fish swam away from the ship's shadow. Birds circled but never landed. To those who witnessed it up close, the air around the fortress carried a weight, an unspoken menace. It wasn't just a vessel. It was a statement, a floating declaration that the cartel was no longer confined to jungles and safehouses. They had taken the sea as their domain. And somewhere deep within the steel belly of the ship, in a heavily guarded vault, lay the most dangerous cargo of all. Not drugs, not weapons, but information. Hard drives and encrypted files containing the cartel's entire global network. Names, routes, banking codes, political allies. It was the kind of intelligence governments had spent decades trying to uncover. To seize it would be to rip the mask off the cartel forever. To lose it, however, would mean the fortress could become a ghost ship, unstoppable, untraceable, and deadly. For the cartel, the floating fortress was invincibility. For the rest of the world, it was a nightmare waiting to be unleashed. Under the cloak of night, the Caribbean sky stretched wide and heavy with clouds, the moon veiled behind shifting darkness. Far below, the water churned with a quiet, steady rhythm, hiding shadows that moved with silent intent. U.S. Navy submarines lay submerged, their hulls gliding through the black water like predators stalking prey. Above the waves, sleek silhouettes of stealth bombers cruised high in the atmosphere, invisible to the naked eye, their payloads primed and waiting. The floating fortress drifted unsuspectingly, lights dimmed, its crew lulled into the false security that had grown from months of unchallenged dominance. On the upper decks, cartel guards smoked and laughed, rifles slung casually across their shoulders, their confidence bolstered by the massive guns welded into the ship's frame. Beneath them, in the corridors thick with the smell of oil and saltwater, men in tactical vests patrolled with discipline born not of training but of fear. They believed their fortress untouchable, a beast too large to be hunted. But the hunt had already begun. At precisely 0200 hours, encrypted orders were transmitted across the U.S. strike force. Within minutes, the ocean erupted into silent movement. SEAL teams, packed into miniature submersibles, detached from the bellies of submarines. The craft sliced upward through the currents, releasing squads of divers clad in black wetsuits. Armed with suppressed rifles, explosive charges, and night vision goggles, the SEALs swam toward their target with mechanical precision. The sea was their ally, swallowing their movements in darkness. Overhead, the bombers shifted into attack formation. Their instruments locked onto the fortress, calculating weak points, scanning for heat signatures from power generators and radar dishes. With a whispered command from the lead pilot, bomb bay doors opened, and the first salvo dropped like stones into the abyss of night. The initial explosions tore across the deck with the fury of thunder. Steel plating buckled, flames leapt high, and men on watchtowers were hurled screaming into the sea. The fortress jolted under the impact, alarms blaring, searchlights flicking on, sweeping across the black waves. The once cocky guards scrambled into chaos, some firing wildly into the night, others rushing to defensive positions. Their fortress, for the first time, trembled like prey. Below the surface, SEALs used the chaos to their advantage. Climbing grappling lines, they scaled the steel hull as shrapnel and debris rained into the water around them. Boots hit the deck in silence. Muzzles flashed only when necessary, short bursts of suppressed fire cutting down guards before alarms could spread. The SEALs moved like phantoms, their every step choreographed in advance. The fortress answered with fury. Deck guns roared to life, spraying the sky with streams of tracer rounds. Missiles hidden in disguised cargo containers emerged with mechanical groans, firing toward the silhouettes of approaching aircraft. One U.S. drone was ripped apart mid-air, a fireball scattering into the waves. But the counterasso only exposed more of the fortress's arsenal, giving the bombers precise new targets. In response, guided munitions rained down again, blasting towers and missile bays into twisted wreckage. Inside the steel labyrinth, chaos reigned. Cartel enforcers poured from bunkrooms and command stations, gripping rifles, some barefoot, others half-dressed. The air filled with smoke and the stench of burning fuel as the ship's generators screamed under the stress. Over loudspeakers, cartel commanders barked frantic orders, rallying their men to repel the intruders. For the first time, their voices carried not arrogance but desperation. The SEAL teams, split into strike groups, moving through narrow passageways lit only by emergency red lights. Their boots clanged softly against grated metal floors, rifles sweeping corners, each step rehearsed through countless drills. The sound of gunfire echoed, sharp and deadly, as ambushes were set and broken. Bodies fell in dark corridors, and blood slicked the floors where it mixed with seawater pouring from ruptured pipes. In the engine room, one team planted explosives on massive fuel tanks, careful to set timers rather than risk immediate detonation. In the laboratory decks, another group fought through barricaded doors, tossing flashbangs into makeshift refineries where chemists cowered behind overturned tables. The SEALs' goal wasn't simply destruction, it was precision. Every charge was placed where it would cripple the fortress beyond repair. The most brutal resistance came near the central command hub. Cartel mercenaries, veterans of battlefields across Africa and the Middle East, dug in with belt-fed machine guns and body armor. Their fire turned narrow corridors into death traps, forcing SEALs to advance inch by inch, using grenades to clear fortified positions. Walls shook under the impacts, smoke filling every corner, choking the air with grit. Even as their numbers fell, the mercenaries fought like animals protecting their lair, refusing to surrender. Above deck, the fortress's anti-air systems continued to claw at the night. One missile streaked upward, narrowly missing a stealth bomber, exploding so close the shockwave rattled the pilot's teeth. The bomber dipped and rolled, releasing countermeasures that streaked like fireworks across the clouds. In retaliation, a payload of bunker-busting munitions slammed into the fortress's upper levels, tearing open a tower and showering the deck with fire. Men screamed as they were engulfed, their weapons clattering uselessly to the floor. On the starboard side, SEALs fought through to the communications array. Bullets ricocheted around them, sparks spraying as rounds struck steel bulkheads. With a quick series of bursts, the defenders were silenced, and one SEAL slammed a charge against the main transmitter dish. Sparks crackled, circuits fried, and the fortress was cut off from the outside world. No reinforcements would be coming. Inside the prison decks, SEALs stumbled upon cages filled with gaunt, hollow-eyed prisoners. Some were cartel traders, others unlucky fishermen, all barely alive. Time was short, but the SEALs forced locks open, herding the survivors toward escape points. Their cries mixed with the chaos of battle, human proof of the fortress's cruelty. The clock was ticking. With explosives armed across the vessel, the SEALs began to exfiltrate. Over radios, their leader's calm voice carried the final call: charges set. Fall back. But the fortress wasn't finished. In a last desperate move, cartel fighters rushed the decks, throwing everything they had into a counterattack. Rockets whooshed into the night, one slamming into a patrol boat carrying SEAL reinforcements, the explosion lighting the sea with fire. Bullets ripped through the smoke as men screamed on both sides, the deck turning into a slaughterhouse of steel and blood. The SEALs responded with ruthless efficiency. Grenades arced into clusters of fighters, detonating with bone-shaking blasts. Suppressed rifles spat death in controlled bursts. Slowly, Methodically, the U.S. forces carved a path back to their extraction points. Their discipline held, even as the fortress seemed determined to drag them all into the depths with it. At last, the final SEAL boarded the last boat, leaving behind only the whine of armed timers echoing in the steel belly of the fortress. Engines roared as the extraction craft sped away, waves splitting in their wake. From a distance, the fortress still stood, scarred and burning, its silhouette monstrous against the horizon. Cartel survivors scrambled across the decks, some firing futile shots into the night, others screaming orders no one obeyed. They did not yet realize that their fate had already been sealed. The sea held its breath, waiting for fire.